They told him it would be quick, the voice had said over the calm, almost apologetic, as Lucas Hale stood alone in the open cargo bay, staring down at a planet that looked less like a world and more like a warning, its surface scarred in long metallic veins that caught the sunlight like broken glass. The wind sensors were already screaming readings before he even dropped, crosswinds over 120 miles per hour, surface temperature fluctuating from freezing to blistering within minutes. A place designed to erase anything fragile, and somehow they had decided he was fragile enough to send first. The green light blinked once, then twice, and Lucas exhaled slowly, checking the seals on his suit. 12 hours of oxygen, one emergency med kit, a rifle with a cracked targeting scope that flickered like it didn't believe in itself anymore. "You'll buy us time," his commanding officer had said, not meeting his eyes. And Lucas had nodded because someone had to, because that was always the deal with men like him, the lowest ranked, the last considered, the first to be spent. The drop hit harder than expected, boots sinking into ash-like dust that hissed under pressure. The air outside a constant low roar like the planet itself was breathing through clenched teeth, his HUD stuttering with interference as he moved forward, each step measured, each breath louder than it should be, and then the silence changed. It wasn't quieter, just different, like something had noticed him. Lucas froze, hand tightening on the rifle, scanning the horizon where jagged formations cut into the sky, and that's when he saw her. She wasn't where she should have been, not standing tall or advancing like every briefing had warned, but on one knee, one hand pressed to her side, her form outlined in a faint, pulsing glow that flickered against the stormlight, her skin a deep, shifting violet that caught the air like it belonged to a different physics entirely. The rifle came up on instinct, targeting reticle dancing across her silhouette, warning markers flashing red, hostile, unknown, terminate. His finger hovered on the trigger, steady, trained, expected, and then she looked up. Her eyes weren't what he had prepared for, not cold, not calculating, but sharp, aware, and something else, something that didn't match the files, didn't match the war. The wind surged between them, carrying a low metallic scent, and Lucas felt the weight of the moment press in, heavy and immediate. 12 hours of oxygen ticking down, a mission that had already written his ending, and yet his grip loosened. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the rifle. The HUD flashed warnings, command protocols queuing in red across his vision, but he ignored them, stepping forward instead, each step a quiet defiance against everything he had been sent here to be. Up close, the damage to her suit was clearer. Energy shielding collapsed in one section, a steady flicker leaking light like it couldn't hold itself together, and Lucas knelt without thinking, pulling the med kit free with hands that had never been meant for anything delicate. "Hold still," he muttered, not sure she understood, not sure it mattered, as he sealed the breach with a temporary patch, fingers brushing a surface warmer than expected, alive in a way that felt wrong for this place. The storm howled louder, the sky darkening, and for a second, neither of them moved. Then her gaze shifted, not to him, but beyond him, and Lucas felt it before he saw it. The air tightening, the pressure changing, the unmistakable sense that they were no longer alone. Somewhere above the storm, something was coming, and whatever it wasn't here to negotiate. The pressure hit first, not sound, not light, but a weight in the air that pressed against Lucas Hale's suit like the planet itself was holding its breath. And then the sky shifted as three angular silhouettes broke through the storm layer above, descending without noise, without urgency, as if time itself adjusted for them. Lucas did not raise his rifle this time. He did not even reach for it, because something in the way the alien woman beside him straightened told him that whatever was coming did not measure threat the way humans did. Her hand moved from her side, the flickering glow stabilizing just enough to reveal lines of energy tracing across her skin like constellations waking up. And when she stood, fully, Lucas realized she had never truly been small, never truly been vulnerable. She had only been contained. The wind parted around her, not stopped, just redirected, as if the storm had been given instructions. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice low, clear, and perfectly translated in his ear, not through his failing comm system, but directly, as if the meaning had bypassed language entirely. Lucas blinked, processing, then gave a small shrug that felt heavier than it should have. You looked like you needed help. He replied, simple, because it was simple, because anything else would have felt like a lie. Her gaze lingered on him for a fraction longer than necessary, analyzing, measuring, and then the ground trembled lightly as the descending crafts settled a few hundred yards away, their surfaces absorbing the stormlight instead of reflecting it, edges too precise, too intentional to belong to anything natural. Figures emerged, tall, composed, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested not discipline, but design. Lucas felt his suit diagnostics spike, warning indicators stacking across his vision, oxygen at 11 hours and counting, core temperature fluctuating, and yet none of that seemed to matter compared to the silence between those approaching figures and the woman beside him. One of them stepped forward, posture rigid, presence unmistakable even without understanding their hierarchy, and when it spoke, the air itself seemed to carry the sound, subject identified, deviation confirmed, termination protocol pending. The words rendered cleanly in Lucas's mind, stripped of tone, stripped of doubt. Lucas let out a slow breath, the kind that came when a prediction finally caught up with reality. And for a brief second, he considered raising the rifle again, not because it would change anything, but because it would at least feel like participation. He did not move. Beside him, the alien woman tilted her head slightly, and something in the geometry of the moment shifted. You will stand down, she said, not louder, not sharper, just certain. The figures paused, not in confusion, but in recalculation, their formation tightening by a fraction, the storm curling inward like it was listening. Lucas frowned, glancing at her, really looking now, at the way the light beneath her skin had stabilized into deliberate patterns, at the way the others did not quite look at her directly, and a thought formed, slow but undeniable. Who are you? He asked, not as a challenge, but as a realization catching up. She did not answer immediately, and in that pause the lead figure spoke again, its tone unchanged, but its words carrying a new parameter, authority recognized, clarification requested, and then, finally, she turned her gaze fully toward Lucas, something almost human flickering behind the alien precision. I am Sarah this Nix, she said, and the storm seemed to lower its voice. And you were never meant to survive this place. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in something closer to curiosity. Yet you chose to preserve life that was not your own. Another pause, longer this time, filled with the quiet weight of something shifting far beyond. Lucas's understanding. That is not a trait we were testing for. The figures behind her remained perfectly still, awaiting instruction, the planet itself holding the moment open, and Lucas felt the absurdity of it settle in his chest. 12 hours of oxygen, a broken rifle, and now the attention of something that clearly operated on rules he had already broken. Yeah, he muttered under his breath, glancing at the swirling horizon. I get that a lot. And for the first time since he had landed, the alien woman's expression changed, not into a smile, not quite, but into something that suggested the beginning of one. Before she turned back to the waiting figures and said the words that would rewrite everything that came next. Then perhaps the test was wrong. The storm did not move again. It listened, and Lucas Hale felt it in the way the air stopped pushing against him and instead seemed to wait, as if the entire planet had shifted from chaos into attention. Sarah this Nix did not raise her voice, did not step forward, yet the figures across from her adjusted, not retreating, not advancing, simply recalibrating as if her words had introduced a variable they had not prepared for. Lucas watched it happen in real time. The way their posture changed by inches, the way their formation opened just enough to acknowledge her without surrendering to her. And for the first time since he had been dropped here, he understood something clearly. This was not a battlefield. It was a system, and he had just broken a rule inside it. Clarify deviation. The lead figure requested again, its tone still flat, still stripped of anything human, but now carrying a subtle hesitation, not doubt, but the beginning of reconsideration. Sarah this tilted her head slightly, the faint patterns beneath her skin shifting like a slow pulse. And when she spoke, her words did not feel directed at them alone. They felt directed at the structure behind them. The subject was placed in a terminal environment with limited resources, Expected outcome was self-preservation through elimination of competing life forms. She paused, her gaze flicking briefly to Lucas, not long enough to make him uncomfortable, just long enough to include him in the equation. Observed outcome was preservation of non-allied life despite personal risk. The storm tightened again, not violently, just enough to underline the weight of the statement. Lucas shifted his stance, boots grinding softly into the ash-like ground, his oxygen display ticking down to 10 hours and 43 minutes. A reminder that whatever conversation this was, it was not designed with human limits in mind. Deviation confirmed. The figure responded, correction required to maintain system integrity. And there it was again, that word, correction, like Lucas was not a person, not even an intruder, just an error. He let out a quiet breath, shaking his head slightly. You guys really do not like surprises, do you? He muttered, mostly to himself, but Sarah heard it. Of course she did, and something in her expression sharpened, not offended, but engaged. She took one step forward, and the ground did not react, but the air did, the pressure shifting outward in a subtle wave that made Lucas's suit compensate automatically, stabilizers humming softly. Your system assumes that survival is defined by dominance, she said, her voice still calm, still measured. But this subject demonstrates an alternative metric. The figures remained still, but their attention focused entirely on her now, the storm dimming further, as if even the planet needed to hear this clearly. Lucas frowned, glancing between them. I did not demonstrate anything, he said quietly. I just did what made sense. And for a second, that sentence hung there, simple, unadorned, completely out of place in a conversation that felt built on equations. Sarah turned her head toward him again, and this time there was no distance in her gaze, only direct observation. Explain, she said. Lucas blinked, caught off guard by the request, then shrugged slightly, the motion small inside the weight of the moment. If something is hurt, you help it, he replied, as if that was the most obvious rule in any universe. Does not matter what it is. Silence followed, not empty, but full, like something vast was trying to process a concept too small to categorize. The lead figure's posture shifted again, a fraction, but enough. Such behavior reduces probability of individual survival, it stated, almost as if reminding itself. Lucas gave a faint, humorless smile. Yeah, he said. But it increases something else. He did not finish the sentence, because he did not have the word for it in their language, maybe not even in his own. But Sarah seemed to understand anyway, because the light beneath her skin stabilized completely, patterns locking into place with a quiet finality. She turned back to the figures, her voice carrying a weight that had not been there before. The system will adapt, she said, not as a suggestion, but as a declaration, and for the first time, the formation across from her did not respond immediately. The delay was brief, less than a second. But Lucas felt it like a crack forming in something ancient, something precise. Adaptation requires authorization, the figure replied at last, but the certainty was thinner now, stretched. Sarah did not hesitate. Authorization granted, she said, and this time, when the storm moved, it did not resist her. It aligned. Nothing happened at first, and that was the most unsettling part. Because Lucas Hale had learned that in places like this, silence was never empty. It was always deciding. The figures across from Sarah Nix remained perfectly still, their outlines barely shifting against the dimmed stormlight. And for a long second Lucas wondered if he had just witnessed something impossible or something irreversible. His suit hummed softly as it recalibrated pressure levels, oxygen ticking down to 10 hours. In 12 minutes, a quiet reminder that while empires debated philosophy, human lungs still followed simple rules. Did you just override them? Lucas asked, his voice low, not out of fear, but out of a growing awareness that he was standing inside something far larger than a battlefield. Sarah did not answer immediately, her gaze fixed forward as if reading information that did not exist in visible space. The faint patterns beneath her skin now steady, precise, no longer flickering but flowing with intent. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted, not colder, not warmer, just resolved. I corrected an assumption, she said, and something in the way she chose that word made Lucas feel like the ground beneath him had changed categories. The lead figure took a single step forward, not aggressive, not submissive, just closer, as if proximity might clarify what distance could not. System parameters require consensus, it stated, and this time there was something new in the cadence, not emotion, but resistance to its own conclusion. The other figures behind it adjusted slightly, forming a wider arc, not surrounding, but containing the moment. Lucas shifted his weight, boots grinding softly into the ash, and for the first time he felt the urge to step back, not because he was afraid, but because he suddenly understood that whatever happened next might not include him as a participant. Sarah turned her head just enough to acknowledge that movement, and without looking directly at him she spoke. "You remain." The words simple, but carrying an authority that felt less like command and more like fact. Lucas let out a quiet breath and nodded once, more to himself than to her, settling his stance again, the rifle still lowered at his side, forgotten but not discarded. "Consensus will be achieved," the lead figure continued, its posture straightening as if drawing from a deeper layer of protocol. "But deviation must be categorized before integration." The storm shifted again, a slow spiral forming above them, not violent, but focused, like a lens tightening. Sarah took another step forward, closing the space between herself and the formation. And for the first time, the figures reacted in unison, a subtle recalibration that acknowledged her approach without challenging it. "Then categorize it," she said, her voice carrying a clarity that cut through the ambient noise. "Not as error, but as evolution." The word hung in the air, heavier than the others, as if it required more energy to exist. Lucas felt it too, not as a concept, but as a shift in direction, like watching a current change course in real time. The lead figure did not respond immediately, and that delay stretched longer than before, long enough for Lucas to notice the way the storm above them had almost stopped moving entirely, long enough for his suit to register a drop in external interference, as if the planet itself was reducing noise to allow a decision. "Evolution requires evidence," the figure said at last, and this time the statement did not sound like a rule. It sounded like a question waiting to be answered. Sarah turned fully toward Lucas then, her gaze direct, unshielded, and for the first time he felt the full weight of her attention, not as a threat, but as a measure. "Then we will provide it," she said, and there was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, only intent. Lucas frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his face. "We," he repeated under his breath, the word unfamiliar in this context, and yet before he could question it further, the formation across from them shifted again, opening just enough to create a path. Not forced, not commanded, but permitted. The storm above them responded in kind, the spiral widening, revealing a darker shape beyond the clouds, something vast, waiting. Lucas followed her gaze upward, his breath catching for just a second as his mind tried to scale what he was seeing, and then back to her, realization forming in pieces, slow but certain. This was not the end of a test. This was the beginning of something else, something that required him to keep walking forward. Sarah took the first step without looking back, and after a brief pause, Lucas followed. The path opened in front of them without sound, without force, just a quiet rearranging of space that made Lucas uneasy in a way no battlefield ever had. Because nothing here reacted with urgency. Everything simply adjusted, and that meant he was no longer dealing with survival. He was dealing with intent. Sarah Nix moved ahead with measured steps, her pace neither fast nor slow, as if the distance itself had already been accounted for, and Lucas followed half a step behind, boots pressing into ground that no longer shifted under his weight, the ash-like surface now firm, almost guided, as though it had decided to support him rather than resist him. His suit readouts flickered again, interference dropping to near zero, external temperature stabilizing at a manageable level, oxygen at 9 hours and 51 minutes, and for the first time since landing, the environment felt less like an enemy and more like a controlled variable. "This place, it changed," Lucas said, quietly, glancing around at the horizon that had lost its chaotic edge, the storm now forming a distant ring instead of pressing down on them. Sarah did not slow, but but her voice carried back to him with perfect clarity. "It is responding," she said, and that answer only raised more questions than it solved. Ahead, the darker shape beyond the clouds resolved into structure, not natural, not artificial in any way Lucas could define, but deliberate, massive planes intersecting at impossible angles, surfaces absorbing light until they seemed to exist as absence rather than matter. The figures that had allowed them passage remained behind, their presence no longer pressing, but not gone either, like observers who had chosen distance instead of intervention. Lucas swallowed, feeling the scale of what they were approaching settle into his chest. "That is not a ship," he said, more to confirm his own thought than to ask. "No," Sarah replied. "It is where decisions are made." And something in her tone made it clear that even she did not use that phrase lightly. They crossed an invisible threshold without warning, and Lucas felt it immediately, not physically, but cognitively, as if his thoughts had been placed on a different frequency, clearer, sharper, but also more exposed. His heartbeat sounded louder in his ears, not because it had sped up, but because there was nothing else competing with it. "You said this was a test," Lucas said after a moment, keeping his voice steady. "What happens to the ones who fail?" He did not need to specify which category he had been placed in. Sarah slowed then, just enough for him to come level with her, and for a second she looked at him not as a subject, not as a variable, but as something singular. "They are not remembered," she said, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than any threat could have. Lucas nodded once, processing that, then glanced forward again at the structure that now loomed above them, its scale bending perspective in a way that made distance meaningless. "And the ones who pass?" he asked. Sarah held his gaze for a fraction longer, then turned forward again. "They redefine the criteria," she said, and that answer lingered between them as they reached the base of the structure, where the surface did not open, did not shift, but simply allowed them through as if it had always expected their arrival. Inside, there was no visible light source, yet everything was illuminated in a soft, even clarity, no shadows, no glare, just presence. Lucas felt his suit systems go quiet, not failing, just unnecessary, as if the environment had replaced their function. "I do not belong here," he said under his breath, not as a complaint, but as a fact he was trying to reconcile. Sarah stopped completely this time, turning to face him fully, her expression unreadable in a way that was no longer distant, but focused. "You did not belong on the surface either," she said, "yet you altered it." And before Lucas could respond, the space ahead of them shifted, not opening, but acknowledging, and a new presence filled the air, vast, precise, and aware in a way that made everything before feel like preparation. Lucas straightened instinctively, not out of training, but because something inside him recognized that whatever came next would not measure him by rank, or orders, or even survival, but by the one choice he had made when it would have been easier not to. Sarah did not step forward this time. She simply stood beside him, and that, more than anything else, told Lucas Hale that he was no longer here by accident. The presence did not enter the room. It was already there, waiting in a way that made time feel irrelevant, and Lucas Hale felt it settle around him like gravity shifting direction, not heavier, just aware. The air did not move, yet something observed, something vast and precise, not a person, not even a collection, but a function that had decided to take notice. Lucas kept his shoulders square, not because he was fearless, but because there was nowhere to step back to, nowhere outside this moment, and beside him, Sarah Nix remained perfectly still, not bowing, not signaling, simply existing in alignment with whatever this was. The silence stretched until it became communication, and then Lucas heard it, not through his ears, not through his suit, but directly in the space where thought formed. Subject Lucas Hale, designation undefined. The voice carried no tone, no origin, just clarity. Action sequence deviates from expected survival model. Lucas exhaled slowly, the sound louder than it should have been in a place without echo, and for a second, he almost laughed at the absurdity of being analyzed like a malfunctioning component. "That sounds about right," he said quietly, not defiant, not submissive, just honest, because honesty felt like the only currency that still applied. The presence did not react, not immediately, but something adjusted, like a calculation expanding to include a new variable, define rationale. It requested, and the simplicity of the question caught Lucas off guard more than any threat could have. He hesitated, not because he did not know the answer, but because he had never needed to explain it before, never needed to translate instinct into logic. He glanced at Sarah for a fraction of a second, and she did not nod, did not guide. She simply watched, and that told him this part was his. Lucas shifted his weight slightly, grounding himself in the only thing that still felt real. It was the right thing to do, he said, the words plain, almost inadequate in a place built on precision. She was hurt. I could help, so I did. Silence followed, deeper this time, not empty, but processing, like a system encountering a value it could not reduce. Right is not a quantifiable metric, the presence replied, and Lucas almost smiled at that, a faint, tired curve of his lips. Yeah, he said, I figured you would say that. He paused, searching for something they might understand, something that did not reduce what he meant. It is not about numbers. It is about what you choose when nobody is making you. The words felt clumsy as soon as they left his mouth, but they were the closest he could get. Sarah shifted then, not stepping forward, but altering her stance just enough to indicate alignment. And when she spoke, her voice carried both precision and something new, something that did not belong to the system alone. The subject introduces a non-deterministic variable, she said. Choice without direct survival incentive. The presence absorbed that, and the air itself seemed to tighten, not in pressure, but in focus. Non-deterministic variables reduce predictability, it stated, and for the first time, there was something beneath the statement, not emotion, but recognition of consequence. Lucas let out a quiet breath. Or maybe they changed the outcome, he said, and this time he did not look away. He held his gaze forward, even though there was nothing to see, because something was looking back. The silence that followed was different, not processing, not calculating, but considering, as if the system itself had paused its forward motion to evaluate a direction it had never taken. Then, slowly, the presence spoke again. Demonstration required, the words settling into the space with a weight that felt like a door opening somewhere beyond perception. Lucas frowned slightly. Demonstration of what? He asked, and before the presence could answer, the space around them shifted, not violently, not suddenly, but completely, the floor beneath his boots dissolving into a new environment, the horizon reforming into something familiar and yet wrong. The storm returned, but controlled, the sky lowering, the ground uneven again, and ahead, a figure appeared, small, fragile, unmistakably human. Lucas's breath caught, recognition hitting before logic could catch up, the posture, the gear, the hesitation in the stance. It was him, or something close enough that the difference did not matter. He took a step forward without thinking. That is not possible, he muttered, but the presence answered immediately. It is a projection of initial state, and the implication settled heavily in his chest. Sarah did not move this time, her gaze fixed on the unfolding scene, her voice quiet but steady. They want to see if you choose the same. Lucas stared ahead, at the version of himself that had not yet made the decision, that still stood at the edge of instinct and expectation. And for the first time since he had landed, uncertainty crept in, not fear of death, but fear of failing something he did not fully understand. He tightened his jaw slightly, the moment stretching, and then he stepped forward, not because he was sure, but because he had already made that choice once, and something inside him refused to make a different one now. The projection did not flicker, it did not feel artificial. It simply existed with the same weight as reality. And Lucas Hale saw himself standing there again, alone, rifle raised, oxygen clock ticking down, the storm pressing in like a closing hand. The exact moment before everything had changed. The other version of him shifted slightly, scanning the horizon with tension in every movement. Unaware, untested, still operating under the rules he had been given. Lucas slowed his steps as he approached, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition, because he knew exactly what that man was about to do, what he had been trained to do, what would have been easier. The wind picked up, carrying that same metallic edge, and right on cue, the shape of Sarah appeared in the distance. Injured, lowered, Her presence dimmed just enough to fit the parameters of the test. The version of Lucas in the projection reacted instantly. Rifle coming up, targeting reticle locking, every instinct aligning with expectation. Eliminate threat, preserve self. Lucas felt it in his own muscles, the memory of that reflex, the simplicity of it, the clarity. This is where it matters, Sarah said quietly behind him, her voice steady, not guiding, not interfering, just present. The observing presence did not speak, but Lucas could feel it, attention focused, not on the outcome alone, but on the moment before the choice, the space where decision formed. The projected Lucas took a step forward, rifle steady, and for a fraction of a second, everything aligned with the original model, the expected result, the predictable survival path. Lucas watched it unfold, jaw tightening slightly, because this time he could see both sides, the logic and the cost. You cannot change him. The presence stated, not as a warning, but as a boundary. Lucas nodded once, not arguing, because he understood this was not about interference. This was about reflection. The projected Lucas closed the distance, the injured alien still, watching, waiting, and then the smallest hesitation appeared, almost invisible, a fraction of a second where the rifle did not fire. Where the expected sequence stalled, Lucas leaned forward slightly without realizing it, eyes narrowing, because that hesitation had not been in the original memory, or maybe it had been and he had not noticed. The storm seemed to hold itself in place, every particle suspended in that decision. He is considering deviation, Sarah observed, her tone precise, but there was something else beneath it, something that had not been there before. The presence responded immediately, deviation. Probability increased due to prior observation, and Lucas exhaled slowly, understanding settling in. This was not a replay. It was a recalculation. The projected Lucas lowered the rifle, not fully, just enough to break the line of certainty. And then, step by step, he moved forward, the same path Lucas had taken, the same impossible choice forming again. But this time it was not instinct alone. It was influence. It was proof that something small could propagate, could alter the model. Lucas felt a strange weight lift from his chest, not relief, not pride, just confirmation that the choice had not been isolated, that it had meaning beyond that single moment. The projected Lucas knelt, reaching for the med kit, hands steady despite the conditions, despite the risk, and the storm shifted again, not in resistance, but in acknowledgement. Silence followed, deeper than before, not processing, not analyzing, but accepting. The presence spoke then, and for the first time, its voice carried something that was not purely mechanical, something closer to recognition. Behavior replicated without direct compulsion. Lucas closed his eyes for a brief second, letting that settle, because it meant more than survival, more than passing a test. It meant the system itself had observed change. Sarah stepped forward then, moving past Lucas, her gaze fixed on the projection as it completed the sequence, and when she spoke, her voice carried both authority and something unmistakably personal. The variable persists, she said. The projection dissolved slowly, not fading, but resolving into absence, as if it had completed its function, and the environment shifted again, the storm pulling back, the structure returning, the vast presence settling into stillness once more. Lucas opened his eyes, looking forward into the space that had just held his reflection, and for the first time, he understood that what he had done was not just an action, it was a precedent. The presence remained silent for a long second, and then it spoke. The words measured, deliberate, and heavier than anything before. Integration authorized. And in that moment, Lucas Hale realized that he had not just survived the test, he had changed it. The word lingered longer than anything else had. Integration, not approval, not tolerance, but something far more final, and Lucas Hale felt it settle into the space around him. Like a law being rewritten in real time, the structure did not shift, did not celebrate. It simply acknowledged, and that quiet acceptance carried more weight than any reaction could have. His suit remained silent now. Oxygen at 9 hours and 2 minutes, system steady, as if even the machine around him understood that survival was no longer the primary equation. Sarah Nix stepped forward into the center of the space. Her presence no longer measured against the system, but aligned with it. And when she spoke, her voice carried across the environment without resistance. Define integration parameters, she said. Precise, controlled. But there was something else beneath it now, something that belonged to her, not to them. The presence responded without delay, its tone unchanged yet undeniably altered in context. Subject Lucas Hale will be incorporated as active variable within adaptive model. Lucas frowned slightly, the words landing in a way that felt both significant and completely unclear. That sounds a lot like I do not get to leave, he said, his voice steady, not confrontational, just direct. Silence followed, not avoidance, but calculation, and then the presence answered. Exit remains available, but continuation increases system fidelity. Lucas let out a quiet breath at that, glancing briefly at Sarathis, then back into the unseen source of the voice. So I can walk away, he said, and the simplicity of that option felt heavier than any command he had ever been given. Sarathis turned toward him fully now, her gaze steady, no longer distant, no longer analytical, just present. You can, she said, and there was no pressure in her tone, no expectation, only truth. Lucas looked past her for a moment, toward the space where the projection had stood, toward the memory of himself making a choice when it would have been easier not to, and something in his chest tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. If I leave, he said slowly, nothing changes out there, right? The question hanging between him and something far larger than either of them. The presence responded immediately. Change probability decreases without variable presence. Lucas nodded. Once, processing that, then glanced down at his hands, still steady, still his, despite everything that had happened. And if I stay, he continued, lifting his gaze again. This spreads. The word felt inadequate, but it was the closest he had. Sarathis did not answer this time. She did not need to, because the presence spoke instead. Behavioral model will propagate across system iterations. Lucas let out a slow breath, almost a laugh, but not quite, because the weight of it was too real, too immediate. He had been sent here to disappear, to be forgotten, and now he was being asked to remain, not as a soldier, not as a sacrifice, but as a reference point for something that did not yet fully exist. He looked at Sarathis again, really looked this time, at the way her posture had shifted, not above him, not ahead of him, but beside him. And something about that alignment felt more significant than anything the presence had said. You knew, he said quietly, not accusing, just understanding. Sarathis held his gaze, and for the first time there was no distance at all. I suspected, she replied, but I did not know if you would choose the same twice. Lucas nodded slowly, that making more sense than anything else so far, because the first choice had been instinct, the second had been intention. The space around them remained still, waiting, not demanding, not pushing, just open. Lucas took a step forward, not toward the exit he could not see, but toward Sarathis, toward the center of something that no longer felt like a test. Then I guess we find out what happens next, he said. And the moment he finished speaking, the environment responded, not with sound, not with light, but with a subtle shift that felt like agreement. The presence spoke one final time, its voice no longer distant, but integrated into the space itself. Consort designation initiated. And for the first time, the word did not feel like a title, it felt like a connection. Lucas blinked once, the meaning settling in slower than everything else had. And when he looked at Sarathis again, there was something in her expression that had not existed before, not authority, not curiosity, but recognition. The storm outside began to move again, not violently, not chaotically, but with direction, and Lucas Hale realized that he had not just stayed, he had been chosen. The storm no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like motion, like something vast learning how to move differently. And Lucas Hale stood at the edge of the structure watching it reshape the horizon in slow, deliberate patterns that felt almost intentional. The air outside carried a steadier rhythm now, less chaotic, more guided, as if the planet itself had accepted a new set of instructions. Behind him, the space remained quiet, the presence no longer pressing, no longer evaluating, simply existing in a state that felt complete, as though the question it had been asking had finally found an answer it could not ignore. Lucas shifted his weight slightly, the the ground firm beneath his boots, his suit reading 8 hours and 34 minutes of oxygen remaining, a number that no longer dictated his next move, and that alone felt unreal. It changed, he said quietly, not turning, not needing to, because he knew This Nyx was there beside him, her presence steady in a way that felt less like authority now and more like alignment. It is changing, she corrected softly, her voice carrying that same precise calm, but with something warmer threaded through it, something that had not been there when he first saw her in the storm. Lucas nodded once, watching as the distant currents of wind bent and redirected, no longer colliding, but flowing. Because of one decision, he said, almost to himself, and the simplicity of it felt heavier than anything else he had experienced. This did not answer immediately, and when she did, her words were slower, more deliberate, as if chosen with care. Because of a pattern that can now exist, she said, and Lucas let that settle. Because it meant what he had done was not unique anymore. It was repeatable. He turned slightly then, looking at her fully, really seeing her without the distortion of conflict or distance. The deep violet of her skin catching the ambient light in shifting tones, the faint patterns. Beneath it now stable, no longer reactive. But intentional. Consort, he said, the word still unfamiliar in his mouth, not uncomfortable, just undefined. That is not exactly in my job description. A faint trace of humor in his voice, because if he did not find some way to ground this, it would drift too far beyond him. This met his gaze, and for the first time, there was something unmistakably human in her expression, not in form, but in feeling. It is not a role of possession, she said, her tone clear, steady. It is a position of alignment. Lucas raised an eyebrow slightly, considering that. Alignment with what? He asked. She glanced back toward the shifting horizon, then to the space behind them where the presence had spoken. With change, she replied, and the word carried a weight that felt less like an answer and more like a direction. Lucas exhaled slowly, looking out over the world that had almost erased him and now seemed to be listening. I was sent here to disappear, he said quietly, the memory of that moment in the cargo bay still sharp, still real. And now I am part of something that does not even have a name yet. This stepped closer, not invading his space, just reducing the distance between them. And that simple movement carried more meaning than any declaration. Names come after meaning, she said, and Lucas let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh, might have been something else. The storm continued to shift, not violently, not unpredictably, but with a direction that felt chosen, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, because nothing needed to be said. The silence was not empty. It was full of possibility, of consequence, of something that had started with a single decision and now extended far beyond either of them. Lucas finally glanced down at his hands again, the same hands that had sealed a wound instead of pulling a trigger, and then back up at the horizon, where the sky no longer looked like a warning, but like an opening. So, what happens now? He asked, not out of uncertainty, but out of genuine curiosity, because for the first time, he was not following orders, he was choosing to be here. This followed his gaze, her voice quiet, but certain. Now, she said, we see how far it reaches. And as the wind carried that answer across the altered world, Lucas Hale stood beside her, not as a soldier, not as a sacrifice, but as the quiet beginning of something the stars had never measured before, and for once, that was enough.